Hi, I'm Dr. Brannick Riggs, Vice President of Education here at dōTERRA International, and I have a dear friend with me today, Laura Jacobs. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Laura.
Hello, thank you. It's so fun to be here. You know, there's many things one could say about oneself, but in relevance to this particular audience, I am proud to be wellness advocate of nearly 16 years. I've been with dōTERRA, and I was fortunate to be one of the original U.S. founders, meaning on the field side. Yeah. And I also hold the rank of Presidential Double Blue Diamond with dōTERRA. And just most of all, I just love being an educator and an innovative thought leader when it comes to health and wellness through this dōTERRA world.
Yeah, but this is kind of fun for you and I to have a conversation because you also bring with you a wealth of knowledge from being a practitioner.
Correct. I actually started to dabble in health and wellness. You know, life has reasons for bringing you needs, right? And I'm super grateful that needs opened me up to possibilities of natural solutions. And when I first officially hung a shingle, it was in, I think it was when I was pregnant with she's going to be 29 here in a couple months. So 29 years ago, I hung an official shingle and started a holistic health practitioner practice and serviced tens of thousands of clientele and helping them on a path of discovery and a path of solutions creating.
Yeah. It's fun for you and I to have these conversations. I went to medical school for a very long time, as you know, but I've learned so much from you and your background over the years that these conversations are just so much fun for me.
And the same for me. I really appreciate the exchange. It's great. We can bring our worlds together, which is the way it should be.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today we're going to talk about epigenetics and have this conversation about how it's kind of the new kid on the block in conversations, right? So tell us a little bit about that and kind of how that's kind of come to be.
Well, for myself, and I'm a learner, and ahead of the curve learner, always checking out the new things, and I would attribute Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, as to my first real exposure decades ago when his book came out, and he was teaching about epigenetics and it being the new kid on the block. And I remember him explaining how for so long, and it's not like DNA has been known forever either.
Right.
But by now it's as old as it is, that discovery. But at some point they thought all this DNA stuff we had was what they called junk DNA. Because they didn't know what to attribute it to. So the discovery of epigenetics, meaning upon the gene. So to Dr. O's credit, I really loved his example of, think of your genes like the keys on a keyboard. I got a piano at my house. Last time I looked, the keys have never changed. Right? Same keys. And so your genes are similar. They're static, and they are what they are, but it's how you play upon those keys. So upon the gene, that is, in other words, it's gene expression, and it's moldable. And that's epigenetics, is how we have gene expression, and more importantly, how we can get involved with it.
Yeah, gene expression as far as epigenetics is concerned. I have a minor in genetics from one of my undergraduate
I didn't know that.
degrees.
That's cool.
And really, when I was in school, epigenetics was not even talked about. That's 1990s, right?
Oh yeah, that's too early.
Yeah. So now it's this really interesting conversation about the things that we choose to do, the things that we choose to give ourselves internally, the diet that we eat, the exercise that we do, the environment that we breathe can change what we play on that piano.
Well, for me, one of my earliest realizations was in studying, as I always do and have, about health, studying certain associations of authority that we really look to for expertise in explaining that certain expressions were really only 2 to 3% driven by gene driven, or I don't know the right terminology.
Inherited genes, maybe.
Yeah, that your genes made you do it, when in fact they said, oh no, it's lifestyle. It's diet and lifestyle. So in other words, the good news and the bad news is we apparently are all about, we're the fingers on the keyboard, right? The whole life we live, the way we think and eat, and we're part of the music here.
And then it comes down to, so why should we care about epigenetics? We talk about epigenetics and people get, I think there's a lot of science to it, and there really is. We could go down a rabbit hole really quickly in epigenetics, and sometimes people are a little bit like, well, it's science stuff, so I guess I don't need to understand that. But why should we care about epigenetics? There's a real good reason we should care.
Oh, yes. And again, good news, bad news.
Yeah.
We have so much we can do to change the influence on our genetic expression. We are not the victims of our predecessors. We're not.
Right.
Sure, maybe they laid down some tracks, but the good news is evolution is far more rapid than we ever believed. We're constantly evolving and adapting to our environments and our circumstances. And our personal self and our life and our generation, we have every bit as much opportunity to influence that expression as anybody else.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I have a brother-in-law that at a young age was attacked by a dog, pretty significantly so.
Sounds awful.
He has 6 children now. Every single one of them have an extreme fear of dogs. Even though he is an adult, is fine being around dogs. It's not a problem for him. Somehow, through his traumatic experience, they have inherited something about a fear of dogs. Now, what is he doing about that? They now have a little tiny dog that is around their house, that he's getting the children used to dogs, but they came, every one of them, scared of any dogs. Now, hopefully, as he's able to acclimate them to that experience, their children will not have the same trauma response that they did when they were younger to those animals. I think this is a great way to explain epigenetics. The dog attack didn't happen to the kids, it happened to the dad, who as an adult has been fine around dogs, but every child inherited that, that fear of animals. So it's pretty interesting.
Boy, that amygdala grabbed onto that story and
Absolutely
drove it deep into the
some genetic
memory.
expression.
Yeah.
Isn't that
But
amazing?
there's comes neuroplasticity is we can relearn. We can change those neural pathways.
Yeah.
We do not have to be a victim of our story.
Yeah.
That's the good news. And that's why we should care.
Yeah.
Is because we know we can do something about it. And that's what I'm so happy about what dōTERRA is doing with their testing.
Right.
Is we're using the advantage of looking at epigenetic shifts in people's performance based on product usage. And that's really exciting to me to pull that into that world and to put it in that context.
Yeah.
To show us that we, again, can get involved in the music we're playing on our keys.
Yeah, that last part that we'll talk about is how our products tie into some of these conversations that we're having now, and how that really is going to be what we're going to be talking about moving forward in the coming years, because there's significant information out there. It's pretty fun, pretty exciting stuff. So let's dive into it, shall we?
Let's do it.
Let me tell you a little bit of a story about myself. My dad is a very smart gentleman, has a PhD in neuroendocrine biology.
Wow. Do you think that's in your genes?
Yeah, maybe so.
I mean, if
maybe
the dog fear is, why not that
That's
too?
right.
You're inherently smart.
We have a
Brannick,
pretty
now that
smart
explains
family.
you even more so.
Mom has a master's degree, dad has a PhD. But when he was at school at Purdue University, it was the early 1960s, their concept of DNA to RNA, RNA to protein, was that it was a pretty good idea, that may have some validity to it. Because Watson and Crick had published their paper in Nature magazine demonstrating the double helix nature of DNA in 1953. So it hadn't been 10 years even when he was in school. Now, go forward to when I was in medical school or in undergraduate learning genetics, in which that is the gospel truth. There is DNA, RNA, RNA to protein. But there was not a single conversation in my undergraduate or graduate work about epigenetics. That really came to be a conversation much more around the early 2000s, in which papers started being published saying, look, we're looking at nature versus nurture here. Is it only nature, meaning DNA only?
My DNA makes me do it.
Right.
Yeah.
It programs what we are and who we are. Or is there some form of nurture or our environment that affects that expression? And that was early 2000s. So after I graduated medical school, that becomes a conversation. So the science is evolving, and this is a new conversation, isn't it?
Well, it's ironic because I opened my wellness practice officially in home in 1995, and I opened my wellness center in 1996. Again, I was exposed to this epigenetic concept early in the 2000s. So I'm like, hey, I've been tracking with this early on. So it's really been a part of my dialogue this whole time is to say, you have influence over the music that you're playing, right? So I'm tracking with you on this time frame.
And it's amazing because really in the past, our professions would have been at odds with each other about this conversation. Right. Now we're realizing that, yes, DNA does have some genes in it that we inherit from our parents. And yes, there are things we can do about it.
Yes.
It brings us together rather than separates us saying, I was right or you were right. It's like, guess what? We were right.
Well, the truth is the truth, right?
Right, correct.
But as you and I both know, as science evolves, truth apparently is evolutionary as well.
It's true.
And what we thought was true back in the day has perhaps evolved in our awareness. And all I have to say, it's for all that I've been about for nearly 30 years of all of this, so much of what I learned so long ago has just continued to be proven over and over and over again to be truth. And I love that it's become so mainstream and that we are finding more common language and more common ground. And what better place to bring that to than dōTERRA, where it's a melding of all kinds of minds. We're all coming from different walks of life, but we all want the same thing, right?
Yeah.
We all want wellness. So great. How do we create that?
Right.
How do we make that happen?
So let's talk about this concept. Let's talk about the concept of epigenetics and how it works. Right, so we begin with our lifestyle in terms of epigenetics. Our lifestyle.
Which can include diet, it can include your thoughts.
Yeah,
right?
correct. Amazingly,
The
even thoughts,
stress,
right.
The environmental toxins, there's all kinds of things that can influence.
So we start with that, the lifestyle that we're giving ourselves, the foods we eat, the thoughts we think, all those things. And then that determines whether or not genes are methylated or not methylated, meaning methylation means a gene can be bound up, right? And therefore it isn't expressed. Or demethylated means that it's opened up to be read, to be transcribed. Right?
So in my world, we just call that turning on or off the switch.
Correct.
But not to be overly simplified, it's better described as a dimmer switch.
Yeah.
So demethylation is turning down the switch, is what you're saying, and methylation is turning it on.
Demethylation is turning it on.
Turning
now
it on. Okay.
Now it's available to be transcribed.
Okay.
Right? And methylation is turning it off, or
which just
the
seems so
dimmer switch
backwards,
down.
by the way.
I know.
Did they
I
have
know.
to make it up that way?
Right. And then
so
there's,
then what is methylation exactly? Just because we hear that word all the time. We hear about MTHFR, and if you don't methylate properly,
Right.
but you just said demethylation is expressing, just unpack that just a little bit
Sure.
more for us.
So methylation is when genes get bound up, meaning that they're basically condensed, and what they may have termed junk DNA before. Like, we've got these extra pieces we don't do anything with. That's a methylated gene. It's still there. It's just not being looked at all. It's not in an open form in which it can be expressed at all, right?
And there are some genes we would like to bind up and shut down, is what you're
Correct.
telling us, right?
Correct.
There's some potential that we'd rather quiet, and other we would love to express more robustly.
Like when we're smoking, if we smoke, right, we can demethylate a gene that then causes us to have poorer lung function, a steeper decline in lung function, and respiratory issues, all by smoking and having a gene be turned on or turned up with the dimmer switch.
So you're literally turning on the genetic potential to have a less favorable respiratory experience
Correct.
by smoking.
Yep.
Got it.
Because you've turned on a gene that's there in all of us.
So we all have that potential, right?
We all do.
Okay.
But if we don't ever give the environment by which that gene gets turned on, we don't have that experience.
You know, it's interesting in a lot of my genetic understanding and study is to look at generations. So, for example, my husband's grandmother didn't really know that smoking and drinking while pregnant wasn't advisable, right? She's having her babies in the 40s, early 40s, and all of her children came out incredibly short, for example. So then the next generation, her daughter isn't a smoker, but she's receiving a lot of influence still from the smoking of her parents, right? They both smoked
she
heavily.
grew up in that environment.
And then there's my husband, right? Not a smoker as well. But now the genes have started to believe, hey, air isn't so great after all. And so then he's very sensitive to smells. We cannot walk down a grocery store aisle without him and he's got a very extreme sense of smell as well, which is interesting. So you can see there's this genetic pattern that because the air is toxic to the genes, he's become overreactive. And a lot of times that could be the manifestation of having like a second generation respiratory expression. Literally has to do with the influence of the genes being taught air is toxic.
Yeah, right. So when you take that, you go from those genes, and then DNA gets transcribed into RNA. That's the messenger, right? The RNA gets transcribed or translated into a protein. Proteins then are expressed on a cellular level, so changes.
All right, so I'm going to interrupt your process.
Go for it.
So we got the DNA is being bound or unbound.
Right.
And when it's unbound, it sends out the RNA, not if it's bound, correct?
Correct. It gets transcribed. If it's unbound, it gets transcribed into RNA.
So it kind of makes a message or a package, or would you say a message?
Sure,
Is the
a
RNA?
message.
Would you call it, because we call it gene expression.
Correct.
So that expression, we'll call it a message. So
Right.
now the DNA is generating a message, an email or a text.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to send it off in the
Yep.
form of RNA.
Mm-hmm.
So the transcribed is it's like a written down message. It's going to get sent off.
Yep.
And then that RNA then hits a
Translator that translates it into
translator.
protein.
Okay.
It says, look, we've got the message. We know what to make. And it makes a
So
protein.
could we call the translator kind of like I use Gmail and I'm counting on the Gmail service
Mm-hmm.
to take my message and to put it into a form that it can then get to its intended recipient, right?
Correct.
So and you said that's a protein. So we
Yep.
go from the DNA, bound or unbound.
Yep.
So if it's unbound, now we have RNA, a message
Yep.
that got written down, and now it's getting written down one more time. So like I wrote my message, now Google, if it's my Gmail carrier, is in a sense kind of rewriting my message and sending it off to the intended recipient for
Delivers
me.
it. Yep.
Okay, so now we're at, that's the protein. Google's
Delivers
the
it to protein.
And then,
Proteins now change what the cell's doing, right?
okay,
So now I've
Hello,
got these
cell.
proteins that are being expressed within the cell, and the cell's changing what it does. Now, cells make up our organs, so it's going to take a little while for all those cells in the organ to get the message to change. Now I have organ change.
so I've been taught the word transduction
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to cellular expression, is the cell now is also interpreting that message and it's changing its activity, right? And if it's like a
Correct.
signature molecule, it might also then send a subsequent message that then triggers activity on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Right? Depending on the
To
nature
other
of the cell,
systems,
right?
correct.
Yes.
That's why.
This is just one big conversation is what
it
you're
is.
telling us.
Yeah, because the cellular change leads to organ change leads to systemic change. But that does not happen overnight, typically. Unless.
Well, it can be rapid or slow.
Correct. So let's
right?
talk about that. Tell me about rapid or slow. We had a conversation about this.
Okay, well, can we just bring it right to our oil world? Can
Sure,
we just bring
yeah.
it right home?
Yeah.
Because I see this all the time. And I think it's so important for people to have context as to their oil experiences, okay? So one person, let's say 4 people use an oil, okay? And one person is like, oh my gosh, amazing, like single or double usage. And they're like, amazing. And then another person is like, give me a couple weeks. Okay, now it's amazing to me. And then the next person's like, nothing. I don't feel nothing. Either way, weeks, months later, I can't tell anything.
Yeah.
Another person is, it's not necessarily my best friend. I don't really like how we interacted, whatever. The oil was the same oil.
Right. It didn't
The
change.
oil's not different. And in our world, I always preface it by saying, okay, we're not talking anybody else's oils. We're talking our oils.
Right.
Pure, number one thing to say.
Consistent.
Potent, consistent, all the things, right? So I know I can count on this oil. It's not even like yield to yield. dōTERRA is so conscientious that we're blending single oils to maintain a tremendous consistency in our chemistry. So the oil is not the variable.
Right.
The
What
person is the variable.
Yes.
Right? And so then I'm receiving an exogenous message, right? An external messenger molecule in the name of an oil has come into my world and it starts playing on my keys, right? Like, hi, I'm here and I've got a message to deliver. And then our capacity to receive that message varies from
Yes.
person to person.
Depending on maybe what we've done to set up being able to receive the message.
So now
right?
back to your question or whichever of rapidity. So
Yeah.
for one person, what I'm observing is they're in a what I call a bioterrain situation to where they're like, bring on, they just get it. Like it's an immediate reception. Like how many of you have emails in your inbox you haven't even opened yet?
Right.
Let's not go there, right? But like how many of you open text messages more often, right?
Yeah.
So why are we more responsive? Like, are you on overwhelm? Is your body
Right.
possibly on overwhelm and you can't handle all your email because you're just not in the position to respond to all those messages?
Yeah.
And in other cases, we might over-respond to where every time you see another email or something come in, now your hair's on fire and you're freaking out. Or, in other words, there's all kinds of ways to respond to
Yeah.
the message.
Absolutely. So a great example of that would be my wife is an incredible pianist. She can sit down, you can put a piece of music in front of her, and she can play it almost flawlessly by
Wow.
looking at it. She's incredible. But if we haven't done the things to maintain our piano, to keep it in tune, to make sure that the keys aren't sticking, etc., you can put a piece of music down in front of her and it's not going to sound right,
That's true.
right?
So same pianist,
Correct.
different piano. In fact, we just swapped out pianos because the other one Well, first of all, it took one of those discs that looks like this. You
Uh-huh.
put that in there. We don't have those anymore.
No, we don't.
So we decided to abandon that. But a couple of the keys had that thud sound, you know what I mean? And so somebody would be going along and boom, boom.
Right.
Okay, so if we have a stuck key on our keyboard, same oil, different keyboards.
Correct.
And again, pianos are consistently the same. DNA is consistently the same.
Right.
But there are variables from person to person. And that DNA will then affect how that oil plays its tune.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
That's a great analogy.
So we really do have to make sure that we're maintaining our instrument, in this case it's our body, right, so that we can have the effect that we're looking for. As we make a lifestyle change, as we make a dietary change, as we make a product change, we want those to be helping, assisting our systems, but to do that, we've got to make sure that we're looking at all of those things, keeping the instrument tuned as best we can, so that then we can have the benefit.
I love where we're going because I love to speak about things in the context of dissonance and resonance, right?
Which
So
is musical as well, which is
it's very
great.
musical,
That's great.
and I think it's very natural that whether we're thinking about it consciously or not, if I bring in a new pianist into my world, a new oil, a supplement, whatever, then I'm looking to how do I feel? And oftentimes we're measuring it by, do I feel a greater sense of resonance or harmony or how does it feel, right? So oftentimes we're naturally measuring things by that, and I can appreciate that that's how we judge things.
Yeah.
However, there's so often that people judge one pianist by another, or however, I'm trying to think, how do I make this analogy keep working? An example would be if you are, this is sometimes a sore spot for people, but caffeine, okay? If you're a caffeine consumer,
Right.
and we all have, I mean, I like dark chocolate as much as the next guy, and I do feel a change in energy when I eat it, so I get it, right? And I am a night owl, so I get it. Caffeine, however, in its nature, has a tendency to say, it gets in our business when it comes to liver detoxification. So if two people are taking an oil, internal, let's talk about like a soft gel, like a Copaiba, okay? And they're having internal usage, and one person has other lifestyle or dietary things going on versus the other. Again, it's a different keyboard, and it's going to change the experience of that. So what I'm trying to get to is you can't always judge a book by its cover. In other words, the harmony or the resonance, you're involved in the process,
Absolutely.
right? This isn't just on that thing, that external stimulus we're bringing in. It's not on your wife when she comes to that piano like, hey, you didn't make that song sound good on my piano.
Right.
You're the problem.
Yeah.
Right? That's not where we should be focusing our attention. It's like, how can I participate more fully in creating more resonance? Like, did I drink enough water? Am I getting enough sleep? What am I eating?
Right.
And how can I do more to keep my keyboard tuned up so then I am that much more able to receive a pianist with the excellence of your wife to come and play on my board?
Right.
Right?
It's the example that you brought up of caffeine in regards to sleep. We know that caffeine blocks adenosine. Adenosine builds up in our system over the day and helps us feel tired at the end of the day. But if I'm blocked to that message because I'm consuming caffeine all day long, then I don't get tired at the end of the day and I'm not sleeping very well. And if I try to have that lifestyle and then use a Serenity sleep system with its internal Serenity soft gels to help support a good night's sleep, that isn't really going to work as well as if I have the lifestyle set up to where I'm going to be able to be in harmony with the message that I'm receiving rather than dissonant with my lifestyle versus what I'm trying to accomplish.
Because in essence, what you just said is the caffeine is competing.
Correct.
And what I've always said is health is math.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, what message rules? And hey, again, night owl, dark chocolate lover. Am I pulling, late nighters because I've got a presentation or something due the next day? Yeah, I am. And am I eating chocolate later in the day sometimes? Yes. And then do I notice a difference in the arc of, say, my Serenity system and its ability to have the impact I'm looking for? Right? So when because I want to touch on the studies that dōTERRA is doing with epigenetics. So when we see a study and certain subjects have seen the needle move in their lives, I appreciated that one of the things in some of the studies you've been reporting to us is the difference between regular and irregular sleepers don't have the same output. Is that the right way to say that?
Absolutely
Oddly
correct.
enough. Oddly
Isn't that
enough.
surprising?
And why are we irregular sleepers?
Right.
Right? Confession of an irregular sleeper. So I want you to know, just to be super real, I've really taken that to heart. Now, I mean, it's kind of like tongue in cheek. I got asked to do the Terra Talk on sleep, the night owl.
Yeah.
So boy, did I study and did I come out of there changed and the better person. But I want you to know I've been at this for 6 months now. I've really seen an impact from the Serenity Sleep System. I could report some very favorable outcomes for me in putting that system to work, and I've loved it. And I'm still a work in progress when it comes to getting the badge of an irregular sleeper. Right? And I've started wearing a mask. I've started mouth taping. I've just noticed what other factors in my sleep hygiene could complement that, and how can I become a better participant in a different outcome. And I found it to be so holistic in that it's not just like, okay, like your wife, it's up to you to make this song sound good.
Right.
No, it's a team effort, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the product, like, hey, it's up to you
Yeah.
to make my life better. It's like, how can I create an environment where more and more resonance is the tune that I'm playing?
What I love about that is that and sometimes this happens too often in the medical space, we set ourselves up as some sort of expert, but the truth is we're fellow travelers in this world along with everybody else. We have our own things that we're doing well and our own things that we're not doing well. I appreciate your honesty with us to say, look, here's the thing I'm struggling with, right? And I think that's wonderful, because really we should be able to say, look, here's the things that I've found to be helpful for me in lifestyle changes, in products, et cetera, for the things that I deal with. Maybe they can be helpful for you. And as we do that, we kind of all move along together and elevate each other, rather than the, shame, you should be
That's
doing
not
these sorts of
helpful.
things, and
Yeah.
that's never helpful. So
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I really appreciate that. In an effort to do my best in that Terra Talk, I interviewed multiple people at dōTERRA. Oftentimes when you have charge of speaking about new products that you have not yet danced with, it's like, okay, I need to talk to the people who know about these products, right? So I interviewed Becca Nixon, I interviewed Alex DeBell, you and I spoke, and I did my research and was really fed. And Lauren Bush, Lauren had done some great work for dōTERRA in putting together, like the sleep course was already done. It wasn't published yet, but I got to read it. And so I felt extremely well informed in my capacity to create that. And what I'm loving is the output is I just created a document, for example, where I took all of that yumminess and distilled it down into a single page of 7 areas where we can really own our own part of sleeping well. And so very quickly now I can offer to people, hey, let's just take a look at these 6 or 7 areas. And so that's what I did with myself. I looked at the fact that the room that I sleep in, the blinds, I've always liked a dark room. So why would it be any different? So since moving to the current home, the blinds changed. And guess what? I haven't slept as well in this home. So I thought, all right, I can either spend the big bucks for those like power blinds and all the things, right?
Right.
But I kind of like how they let light in during it just feels complicated and fussy. I'm like, I'm going to get me a sleep mask. That's a much simpler resolution, right?
Absolutely.
But just really looking at where can I become the best team member for what it is I'm trying to create. And we just see such magnificent things with people's capacity here in dōTERRA when people really take an interest in things as simple as hydration, right? And making an effort and an effort to move more, an effort to change their diet. I just see responsiveness levels escalate to immeasurable levels of success because people are joining the sheet music here, right? They're getting involved.
Right. And everything that we do, every little increment that we improve and change is helpful at those systemic changes overall, right? None of it goes to waste.
No.
Right?
So epigenetics, again, means that we have the capacity to get involved in playing the music on our genes. They're just getting played all day long,
Absolutely.
whether we like it or not. Like
Correct.
your DNA is busy. It's not just like...
We don't
it's
get
just
that
like,
choice. It's being
busy.
played.
It's being played 24/7.
Yep.
And that transduction and either shutting down or messaging going out is a constant thing. One thing I think we talked about rapidity, that yes, we can see rapid responses, but we can also see slow responses.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes we're like impatient, like, hey, I'm doing this thing and I'm not seeing a difference. And what if you've been doing it for years and you're not seeing a difference? Then it means you don't have the capacity, that something about your personal terrain
Right.
Doesn't have, the math isn't there, right?
Right.
So you're not getting the expression that you desire because not enough has culminated to create the result. So instead of us, and again, this is where let's take the victim hats off. Let's just
Yes, correct.
let's get over that and hide behind my genes made me do it and all those things. And let's
Right.
just say change is possible.
Correct.
Evolution is real.
The math is always true.
The math is always true.
1 + 1 will always equal 2.
Yes.
So let's just accept that and then figure out, all right, what do I need to do to make that work for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done this with a couple of factors as of late since adding MetaPower
Mm-hmm.
to my world. I've been doing MetaPower hardcore for over a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I've really observed where am I really seeing the needle move
Mm-hmm.
and where is it not moving as much as I'd like to see it move. The product's the same. Other people, I can look around me and be like, okay, other people are getting results
Right.
here and there. Where am I getting results? Where am I not?
Yeah.
And so there's been areas where I've brought in additional partnership on my part, and then I see the changes I desire escalating when I'm creating a more favorable environment
Yeah.
for those outcomes. And in other cases, if you're not bringing it, then it may not happen.
Right.
I
Right.
may not get that
Yeah.
expression, right?
Yeah. You have to make those changes.
You do.
Right. Right. And just accept that math is true. So therefore, how do I make it true for myself?
Well, the bottom line is we're not a passenger on this ship called our body.
No.
We're not a passive passenger and somebody else is in charge.
Right.
You are the captain.
Right.
And you get to decide where it's going. And it's not really a great idea to wake up one morning and say, oh my gosh, there's an iceberg 500 feet out.
Yeah.
There was so many warnings. Have you ever seen the Titanic,
Yeah.
the play?
Yeah.
It's really disturbing.
It is. Right.
There were so many warnings,
Right.
right?
Right.
In fact, I heard you say at a Reclaim Your Health event, I really appreciated this. And I've heard Dr. Peter, is it Atia? I don't know how he says his last name. Outlive, the guy who wrote Outlive.
Yeah.
I really love him. And he says in his book, he's like, look, as your doctor, I'm in your eagle's nest and I'm keeping an eye out for you.
Yeah.
I'm looking ahead and I got the binoculars. I've got these extra tools. I can read your blood work.
Right.
But the day to day, you're the captain.
Yeah.
You're driving and it's up to you to heed those warnings.
Yep.
And you don't have to run into an iceberg. That doesn't have to be your story if you pay attention to all. So I think listening and paying
Right.
attention to, there's clues. Our body's throwing clues all the time.
And part of that looking ahead is looking at your own inherited risks. What are the things that my family typically has? My parents, my grandparents, et cetera, knowing, okay, so then what is the environment that I need to set up for myself to not have those things happen to me, right? If I inherited certain genetic traits, which we all do,
Yes.
but yet I have a lifestyle in which those genes will never be turned on, I have absolute control over that.
Right.
Right?
In other words, we don't have to be terrified of not only do not need to blame our genes
Right.
for our outcome, we also don't need to turn them into a fear factor. In fact, DNA testing has become far more accessible. And there is the kind of that, I want to know and I don't want to know.
Right.
And I've kind of tested
Right.
this out with some of my kids. And the more common answer is, I don't want to know. I don't want those ideas in my head. And I think I can appreciate that coming from a 20-some
Sure.
odd year old who just, but at
Right.
age 60 plus, I'm like,
Right.
you know what? At this point, I want to be more informed. I think it's
Yeah.
super useful to know that because I really understand I'm in charge of
Yeah.
expression. I can get so involved in this process.
But it's not just, when we look at genes, we're not just looking at what are the genes that I have that are scary, that I may
Right.
have problems with.
Right.
But also, there are genes that tell us what are the lifestyle things that I can adopt that will have significant impact for me,
Oh,
right? Rather than spending all my energy over here, in which I don't have a gene that's really going to assist me in this.
right.
I've got genes that will assist me in these things, though therefore I want to turn those on by doing these things. It will really help me if I do these activities as opposed to these. So nutrigenomics, or that
Sure,
is
yeah.
a fabulous way
Yes.
for us to take a look at specifically what are the things that I should be doing to help my health.
So what
over
I'm
the
hearing
long
you
term.
say is I can hire my genes to work for me. So if I
Absolutely.
understood, because I know this is available, I haven't done this kind of testing yet. I've done some of the nutrigenomics, but I understand you can actually have more knowledge as to how your body prefers to be exercised. I do know
Correct.
that fat, protein, and carbohydrate utilization, or the lack thereof, are some of the things you can be informed about. So then that might explain some of your dietary responses, and you could get more involved in better. So I happen to know in my testing, it was kind of like exceptional to everyday to not so great, that kind of words. And it was not so great when it came to fat utilization, which I found interesting because I crave fat. Well, that would make sense.
Right.
So then how could I complement my body's ability to utilize fat by bringing in some digestive support, for example, right?
Right.
So that's what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then I can work with my genes instead of perhaps ignorantly working against them.
Correct. Like for my nutrigenomics tells me that cardiovascular exercise is where I should really invest in, because my body responds better to cardiovascular exercise than it does strength training. So that made me, I'm trying, like you, I'm trying to become a runner. You're trying to become not a night owl. I'm trying to become a runner. I don't know about this runner high
Do you think
thing.
there's
I've not
night owl in
experienced
our
this.
genes?
Maybe.
Is that possible?
I don't know. But then also within that, I found out that I'm great at utilizing carbs,
I had an exceptional use of carbs as well.
which is a great superpower to
That
have.
is a
to
great
be honest
superpower.
with you.
Thanks for reminding me of
I
that.
just wish I could run and have more fun doing it. But I'm trying. I'm working on it, right?
Something
But-
to aspire to.
But knowing where I focus my energy has been really helpful for me. And that really is into this epigenetic conversation of how do we hire our genes
Yes,
to do
to
some
work
things
for us, and
right?
favorably.
Pretty
So we've
fabulous.
talked about how epigenetics specifically is more the new kid on the block.
Yep.
And it really didn't come into play until the early 2000s. So it's only 20 years old. Right?
Correct.
This is a new science.
Yeah.
And yet exceptionally expressed, no pun intended. I'm finding to be what we do know to be very, very useful and very empowering. So we talked about good news, bad news.
Yeah.
We can no longer hide
Right.
ignorantly between, I'm just a passive passenger on the ship of my genes. No,
We are captain of the
that
ship.
doesn't fly, right? You're the captain of your ship. And so a very empowering conversation. I think it would be useful for wellness advocates and customers alike then to understand dōTERRA's epigenetic testing and to bring that in, like, what are you guys testing and what are you proving in that kind of a test that then helps us better understand this gene play we've talked about?
It's become a fascinating area for us. Really, this is so very cutting edge. It's really not many other organizations, companies.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
This is a commercial break.
Yeah.
I just want you to know, the more and more I'm out there, I just want to celebrate and thank dōTERRA for being cutting edge.
Thank you.
I had a downline team member leader say to me, oh my gosh, I just went to a conference and they were talking about all these things. And she's like, dōTERRA is way ahead of all that. So thank you for being cutting edge. Thank you for employing something like this epigenetic testing, because things are so much more, the beauty of being in this industry for almost 30 years, and you and I've been doing this same time, is the provability
Right.
is astronomical.
Absolutely.
I'm loving that. So
And
sorry
this-
to interrupt, but I just
no.
want to say thank you, dōTERRA.
And this gives us a new realm in which we can now look at products and say, okay, we know that products like the foods we eat, like the lifestyle that we adopt, is changing our expression of genes. And those genes can be, depending on what we're choosing, can be helpful or not helpful for us, depending on our choice, right? If I eat a Twinkie, probably not helpful. But I eat fresh
Why would
lettuce.
anyone ever
I don't
eat
know,
a
because
Twinkie?
it's the same for
I mean,
decades.
really?
Yes. But I can look at now products to say we now have products that we can show are changing genetic expression, changing things at a cellular level, which is really fascinating to see, right?
So we're bringing in a new set of fingers on the keyboard, like kind of like a duet, right?
Yeah, there
Maybe
you go.
they're coming in and helping us change up our tune, change how those genes are being played. So it's a new stimulus, which then is going to change transcription.
Right.
Is that a fair way to say it?
Correct.
And so then now we got all this email analogy, like I put a message in,
Now
it's
we're
going to
gonna
send it on, put it to Google, and Google's going to send it out to my recipient, and it's going to go down the line. So I think it's so important to go back to help us understand what you're measuring.
Yeah.
And at what point you're catching us in the sequence. So if it's playing on the keys and then the DNA is like, oh, we're going to do a new song here. And then we got the RNA expression, which goes into the protein, which then goes into, I believe you said, cells,
Correct.
then organs, then systems, right?
Correct.
And that's kind of where it becomes observable to us.
Correct.
Way down there is maybe at a cellular level, but certainly at organ and system levels.
Correct.
Then when you're measuring, not DNA, you're measuring, in your testing, you're measuring epigenetic or
Right.
gene expression.
Correct.
So you're looking at genes, the keyboards,
Right.
and you're looking at that they're being played different.
Yep.
Or they have
We're
a
looking
different
at, are they
output.
being upregulated or downregulated
Okay.
based upon the change that we made and observing. We check what are the genes being expressed here. We then have an intervention, which is
Sounds
product,
serious.
whatever you want to put, right?
Yes.
And then we check now what genes are being expressed. What
So
genes are
do you
down
actually
regulated and
know
up
then in
regulated.
this world what genes I want up and down regulated? Do you know what gene would be preferably turned down and others that would be preferably turned up? Are they that smart in the
We
genetic
know
world?
to some degree.
Okay.
To say that we're settled on we understand the full genetic library, we
Okay.
don't really know
Okay.
all of the genes. We're beginning to understand this more and more, right? Once the Human Genome Project said, look, we now have sequenced the human genome.
That was huge, epic.
Incredible. In our lifetime,
Yes,
so we can now
epic.
say, here's the human genome. Now we can begin to look at, now what do they do? What do these genes do? How are they helping us or not helping us based upon what is being, transcribed?
But there's definitely some, because when I sat with Dr. O, he went through I love the LRP gene, right? That was one of our
Yeah,
favorites, right?
isn't that a great one?
I can
Right.
remember that one.
Like
The
we
rest
couldn't
of
have
them,
named that one better.
Yeah. But the rest of them, don't ask me to repeat
Right.
them. But they seem to be very well defined. So then in your testing, when you're pulling out those results, we had 96 or whatever it was, different genetic, statistically significant changes in genetic expression. I'm trying
Yeah.
to say this correctly. We saw 96 changes that were marketable.
Right.
And then you're getting a report back as to what every single one of those genes are. There was a fair number of them that you do know exactly
Correct.
what they do, and then you do know if the right ones are being turned up or down.
Yeah.
Correct?
But our challenge is, just to be very honest with you, our challenge is looking at all the data that comes back and figuring out, well, what do we talk about?
Right.
If we've got 5,000 gene changes that have come back, well, which ones do we discuss? And how do we address those things? So we choose a few,
Yeah.
LRP being one.
That's what Dr.
Great.
O said, is we chose 3 to tell you about at
Correct.
convention. Out of all of these,
But there were so
we
many.
picked
and,
3.
and some of them 5 times upregulated, meaning we saw a 5-fold increase in the expression of some genes.
Wow.
And so obviously we look at those first and go, that's a significant change. How do we talk about those, right? And you're going to see more and more data coming out on epigenetic studies over the years to come because it is cutting edge, because it is fascinating, and because we can now look at how does something change what we're expressing. It's pretty incredible data.
It's pretty staggering.
Yeah.
I became aware of this, I want to say 3 years ago, and went knocking on the door. And I think Corey Lindley was one of the first I hit up amongst a couple others, like, dōTERRA needs to do this. Like, we need to test the oils against the human genome and see what they do. And so I could not be more thrilled. And I have heard little hints about really cool stuff that you're up to. And I think we're going to be blown away.
Yeah, it's
I really
pretty
do.
cool. And if we can begin to understand epigenetics, which is the conversation that we've had today, if we can begin to understand the concept of epigenetics and be able to talk about it with people, this is going to help us immensely be able to share this data with so many people and be able to help so many people with the challenges that they're dealing with.
So if I were a wellness advocate and I wanted some takeaways from today, maybe the first thing I would want to tell myself is, in case you haven't heard about epigenetics, it's okay. It's only about 20 years old.
Correct.
And it's really
which is
become-
still new,
And it's still new.
really new.
Like, it was barely being talked about 20
Right.
years ago. It's just become more mainstream.
Yep.
Really only in the last few years.
Yep.
And so just know, again, your company is cutting edge, right?
Give
That's
yourself a break.
right.
It's new.
So the first thing you would want to know, other than that, is it tells you there's things you can do about it, that you can get so involved in the music that your DNA is outputting.
Yeah.
And that in that involvement, you can really determine the quality of the song coming out. Like, you can get involved with diet and lifestyle and all the things. And as you combine that with, say, some dōTERRA products in your daily routine, you can really enhance the environment in which those products get to come and play. Because again, they're like a duet. They're helping to play on your board with you. And we can be really, really, and so we don't want to like hold the product responsible again, because the product is consistent and we're looking around us and we're like, well, that person's having a great experience. And comparison here doesn't necessarily help, other than, hey, I can see what's possible with this product just based on observation. So if I want to make it more possible for me, well, then I'd want to get involved, because I'm involved. I'm responsible ultimately,
Right.
consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, you're involved or not, whether
you like it or not.
Yeah, you're involved whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and so are my ancestors, right? And if
Yep.
you just want a slight out, but then we really have such a possibility of partnering it's like, I love the term duet because it really is a partnership and getting involved in how those keys are being played and really deciding what do I want to do by way of diet and lifestyle and my thoughts. I'm really into thought discipline, right?
Absolutely.
And just how much you're thinking. Just being in a spirit of gratitude, for example, versus a spirit of blame or victim mindset is epic.
Absolutely.
For how you're impacting what's playing out in your body.
This really should give us all hope.
It should give us hope.
Hope that we can change our circumstance.
Yes.
We can change the circumstance of those around us that we love and care for. This is really a message of hope.
It's so worth your time and your energy and your resources.
Absolutely.
So then, one, it's new. Two, such good news. Such good news. Such a possibility to influence outcome. And therefore, also to understand that our experiences, be they great, good, to yuck, whatever they are, that we can actually change that as well.
Yep.
I always like to say a pure oil is just like divinely wired to always move you in a good direction. That's just the way I see it, that a good oil is just always there to move you in a good direction. And if the road is bumpy on the way to good, then it might be that you weren't ready for the partnership.
Correct.
Like, have you ever tried to play a duet with someone and you're stepping on each other's toes and you're not really prepared for the partnership? So how can you prepare yourself to have a very harmonious partnership with the product?
Yeah.
And that might involve something like, well, maybe caffeine might be getting in the way of the experience you want to have, and it's making the road more bumpy than it actually needs to be. Or dehydration, or I mean, I don't want to always pick on caffeine, but it's a good one to pick on. But there's so many things we can do, right? So one, good news, I can do something. Two, I can do more to really increase the positivity of the outcome. And then lastly, with dōTERRA, dōTERRA is giving me an opportunity then to see what's possible. And also, I think to pay attention more. So because of what you've been sharing about things like, and I hope I'm going to say this right. So you've been sharing with us, I don't know, you tell me how to say this correctly. Something about, I think the term was brain aging. And after 6 weeks of usage on the Serenity product, how would you explain that brain aging measurement? Was it a deregulation? I don't know. What's the right terminology for that?
I would say that we saw a statistically significant difference in brain aging as
based on epigenetic observations.
Based on epigenetic observations.
Okay, so what that caused me to do, and this is why again I'm a real fan, is one, thank you for offering proof for what's happening and making it measurable and showing us what's possible with a product. What that did for me, having been on the product for a good 6 months, by the time I'm hearing some of this science, I would say I didn't wrap my head around it as much at convention as I did at leadership because you brought in that brain thing. And I was like, wait, what?
Sure.
Listening to that. Yep. And then I went back and I measured my own experience. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting because I've noticed the following things have changed with me in those same 6 months. And maybe I wasn't directly attributing it to that. And I stepped back and I asked myself, well, what else have you done right? During that time? Could you attribute it to anything else? And I had to say to myself, well, it's actually been some of the roughest 6 months of my life after breaking my foot and
all the things.
I would say it's not been a good 6 months,
Right.
but in some cases, I've seen the needle move, especially with my brain. So I appreciated then having a new scope through which to observe my own experience and to be able to go back and say, have I seen a difference and can I measure it? And the answer is yes.
You know, I have to say, as we wrap up here, that early in dōTERRA, and you were early, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't a huge science and research department. There wasn't a lot going on that we could say, this is how these things are working. You guys came in early, accepted on faith and experience of stuff works. We see it. It's helpful. Thankfully now, we're a large enough company. The science has come far enough that now we're able to say, and look, here's the science to back up what you already knew. We're not telling you anything new.
Yeah, I was going to say,
There's no new news here.
I was 12 years experienced in watching people's lives change by simply changing what was upon the keys. But it's so fun to have the science.
But the show, I just want to have so much respect for you as an early adopter who said, I have observation. I don't have a lot of science to this yet. And to realize that now we can say, and here's how it's working.
Yeah.
Here's what we're seeing in genetic changes, et cetera. So I am really grateful to be partnered with dōTERRA at this time in which I can bring my training into your experience and say, look how these things marry so well together. So,
And I love it as much as anybody. I love being able to offer measurable statistics and results. And I think like anything, like think about the internet and how much you take it for granted every day.
Right.
But we're standing on the shoulders always of the past, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at how my own almost 30 years in health and wellness as an expert is stacked. And I'm so grateful for those early years of simply trusting experience. I think Dr. Hill's been one of the greatest proponents of trust your experience. And thank goodness
Absolutely.
he led our mindset and our heart set way back from the beginning. And he wasn't an amateur, right? He practiced medicine and all the things for a number of years as I had, quote unquote, practiced in simply supporting people and making new decisions. And so we both stood on the shoulders of a lot of experience. And so it was easy to lead out a movement in an innovative stage. And how wonderful today, as you know, the first leader training I ever went to with Dave Sterling, he said, we plan to take essential oils mainstream. And dōTERRA has.
absolutely.
They really have. And at the same time, the mainstream likes more science. And so the timing is perfect.
Yeah.
It's a perfect pairing. And I'm grateful to be here. And I'm so grateful to all of you for all you do on a daily basis to really back up what we're doing with sound science. It's tremendous.
Great partnership. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.